I'm starting a new video series called Unlearning Unlicensed, where I am going to correct the myths, misconceptions, and misunderstandings that have been perpetuated by RF Elements since they started selling antennas more than a decade ago. Almost everything that RF Elements says, which they claim to be education, they claim to be helpful for WISPs, is actually just self-serving, misleading marketing. It's intended to make WISP believe that their products are uniquely capable of solving the problems that WISPs encounter. And there's no better way to demonstrate that than to simply play this podcast. I'm going to pause it, and then I'm going to provide my commentary. Here we go. They call him their product evangelist, not their product designer, not their applications engineer. He is the product evangelist. All right, let's keep on going.
Welcome to the RF Elements Unlicensed Podcast. I'm Caleb Nauer, and we're joined here with Tassos Alexou. What's going on, my man?
What's happening?
All right, so they've got a bunch of friendly banter at the start of their podcast. I'm going to skip through most of that and just keep on going.
I think one of your favorite ones that you've talked about, especially to us, internally, is the whole myth of more gain equals more better.
Yeah.
People's answer is like, I need the biggest antenna, I gotta have the most gain. But in the real world, it doesn't always work out like that.
Okay, so more gain equals more better. They're calling that a myth or a misconception or a misunderstanding. Gain is the ability of an antenna to efficiently focus the energy in a desired direction. And that works for both transmit and receive. So when you can take a beam, a signal, and focus it specifically in one direction, then you can improve the signal, not just for the transmit, but also for the receive. And gain is the most important antenna parameter because that determines the distance that you can communicate over. It determines the link distances. It also determines the modulation rates because the modulation rates are a product, or the speeds. The modulation rates are the speeds. That's determined by the signal to noise ratio. And when you concentrate the signal on both sides of the link, then you're going to increase the signal. But importantly, you're also going to decrease the noise because you're going to pick up less noise from the surrounding environment by having a narrower beam width. And so gain is the most important antenna parameter. And here you have an antenna vendor that is saying that gain is not always good. Gain is always good. It's always good to have more gain. It's always good to focus the signal in the desired direction and ignore noise in the unintended directions. That is always good. But why would RF Elements say that gain isn't always good? Well, because they make low gain antennas. That's why. But let's hear what RF Elements has to say about it.
Throw you that softball to start running with here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. So obviously gain is extremely important, right? There's this thing called link budget. So yeah, you definitely have to have enough gain to satisfy and balance out that link budget equation. That's the first step. Now we know that there's a lot of variables out there, right, in the world that can change this link budget calculation because it's not static. It's not just point A to point B. There's environmental issues, there's noise issues. So, I mean, typically, yes, you do want more gain than what the link budget says because, it does rain, it does snow. You can't always overcome, those completely, but it's good to buffer your link budget just a little bit. But the key here is, not to just use ungodly amounts of gain just because. I think that's really the main point we're trying to throw out there. I mean, I see people on the forums all the time saying, yeah, I'm doing a 1 mile link and, just use 34 dBi dishes, right? And it's just that kind of generic thing is just...
There's nothing wrong with using a 34 dBi dish on a subscriber roof to go 1 mile. You will have an awesome link if you do that. Now, is it overkill? Yes. Is it detrimental? No. The only decisions that you have to make are the size of the dish on the subscriber roof and the ability for that roof to support that and the customer to agree to it, and the cost of the dish. But there's nothing wrong with using a 34 dBi dish. In fact, using a 34 dBi dish rather than a 23 dBi dish or 18 dBi panel is undoubtedly, in every situation, going to result in a higher quality link. And if your main objective is to have the highest quality link, then gain is your friend in this situation. Let's keep on going.
I mean, because you also can, overdrive, right, the radios themselves. So radios don't like super, super hot signals.
Okay, so yeah, you can overdrive a radio with super, super, super hot signals, but that's not what he just described. That's not a 34 dBi dish at 1 mile. You're not going to burn out a radio with super hot signals. Do you know how you will burn out a radio? With VSWR. That's how you burn out a radio. And do you know how you get VSWR problems? Well, you sell 5 gigahertz antennas that don't support the entire 5 gigahertz band. And then when a WISP moves their radio to a section of the band that the antenna doesn't support, then they burn out their antennas. Who does that? RF Elements. So RF Elements only supports from 5.18 to 6.0 with most of their 5 gigahertz antennas. So they don't even support the entire frequency range of the 5 gigahertz band. And if WISPs unknowingly operate their radios in the lower 5 gigahertz, then they risk burning out their radios, overdriving their radios due to VSWR problems from these guys' antennas. But they're not saying that, hey, make sure you have a frequency range that matches your radio with your antenna. They're saying gain isn't always good. And the reason why they say gain isn't always good is because they make low gain antennas. So they're just creating fear, uncertainty, and doubt about gain because that helps them sell more of their junky antennas.
Especially at these higher modulation rates, you definitely need more.
Higher modulation rates, you need more gain. And you need more gain because that increases the focus of the transmit, but it also increases the receive sensitivity. So more gain is better for higher modulation rates every time. Also, higher gain is less noise. So again, modulation rates are determined by signal to noise ratios. You want more signal, you want less noise, that gets you better modulation rates.
The higher you go in modulation rate, but I mean, to just kill it with gain, it's definitely not more better for sure.
It definitely is more better for sure.
Stick with the calculation, figure out what you need physically for that link. You can add a few dBi, obviously to kind of buffer it for rain fade and other potential problems. And it's best to have a more balanced network where the radio's happy with the received signal and everything else just stays in tune from there.
It's best to have more gain.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to run that link calculator. We beat this drum all the time. Link calculator, pay attention to it. And it really matters because, like I said, you don't want to overdrive it. You don't want to overpay.
So you do want to overdrive. So you do want more signal to noise ratio on every single station because each station takes up airtime on the access point. And if you have one station with less than ideal signal, then it's wasting airtime on the access point. It means that there's not as much speed and capacity available on the access point for everybody else. So in every situation, you want to maximize your signal to noise ratios, maximize your modulation rates, and that's how you build a robust network. And you do that not just by seeing, okay, well, the subscriber, they're going to have a 100 megabit plan, so we need to have 100 megabit modulation rates plus a little extra in case there's some rain fade. No, you want that subscriber to have the best modulation rates possible. You want that subscriber to have the best antennas possible. And that's going to build a robust, durable, scalable, high-speed, high-capacity wireless network. You don't do it by just barely getting enough link budget for each subscriber. You definitely want to overdrive the link budget and build the most robust wireless network possible.
Like, why do you want to pay for, the highest gain antenna you can got, where something simple, something smaller, especially smaller footprint, your small symmetricals and stuff for your micro pops, there's no need to put the absolute biggest antenna that you need on there, where you can get by just fine with, something lower gain. Also, not picking up the noise from 8 miles away, which is...
Okay, not picking up the noise from 8 miles away. When you focus the beam, you pick up less noise from within that beam. So if your main lobe, say you're using a 30 dBi antenna, a dish, a 30 dBi dish, that has a 6-degree beam width. Now, if you use a 23 dBi dish, essentially 7 dBi less gain, now you've got double the beam width. You're picking up twice the amount of noise within that main beam. So focusing the signal exactly where it needs to be every time is going to improve your signal and decrease your noise. Every time. You're not just picking up noise from further away. Your SNRs there are going to be the same, but by narrowing the beam width, you're picking up less adjacent noise. So they're talking about picking up signals from far away. There's something called sector bloom, where you do want to not send signal further than it needs to go, and you don't want to pick up signal outside where you need to be. And you solve sector bloom by down tilt. You tilt the sector down so that you're not picking up that distant noise. You don't solve sector bloom with less gain, because that's inefficient design. So, 2 misconceptions here perpetuated by RF Elements already. We're only really a minute into their podcast.
Important as well.
Yeah, I think that's another kind of like misconception on that as well, right? Because people say, well, I could use more gain, but I could just turn down the power. And you're right. Obviously you can, but you can't turn down the received gain of that higher dish. So even if you turn down...
So receive gain of the higher dish, as long as the dish is pointed at the signal source, which it is, right? You've aligned the dish and you're pointing that directly at the signal source. Then having more receive sensitivity in that desired direction is always good. Even if there's a noise source behind it, still having more focus at the signal source is going to improve your SNRs every time.
Your overall TX power, again, on the receiving side of that, you're going to get a much hotter signal because, again, if you have 34 dBi for antenna gain, that's how much, intensity you're going to receive. So you can't really tune both sides down. Obviously, adjusting your TX power appropriately.
Having good receive sensitivity is always good. I don't know what he's talking about.
within EIRP limits. That's another thing you have to think about, which I think a lot of people don't do sometimes. But
EIRP limits? What's that? I mean, you just turn everything up all the way, right?
yeah, exactly. Full power.
Full power. So I remember the first little link I did where it was a super short, and I forget the details, but like the received signal came in like a meg 23 or something crazy like that. And I'm like, man, this thing's going to run great. And it didn't run with a flip because I was just completely overloading the receiver. So we see that one quite a bit as people are in the learning curve for sure.
Yep.
So cool. Another one that someone threw out there, let's see. Oh, 2.4 is dead. The death of 2.4. We've been hearing about the death of 2.4 since the launch of 2.4, I think. So, I mean, it's certainly not as popular. You know, when we first started doing this years and years ago, we were 24 dBi dishes on 2.4 shooting 10 miles to an Omni. And you could, because, I mean, there was no noise, there was no competition, and you were happy with it. You had 500K, that thing was maxing out at, but, you were happy with that. Now, of course, with the advent of just so much more noise and competition and the wireless routers in people's houses and stuff, that band got trashed out a bit. But honestly, I think it's making kind of like a retro resurgence, kind of like, I don't know, bell-bottom jeans or something like that. These things are sort of cyclical. So definitely seen a lot more. Yeah, bell-bottoms. They actually do if you kind of flip it.
Yeah.
My Halloween costume for this year, so... But yeah, I mean, I see a lot of people talking about 2.4 a lot. I thought we'd kind of talk about that and just, let folks know it ain't dead.
Yeah, no, I think really from my perspective, the death, I would say, is really the support for 2.4 gigahertz and, manufacturers, I guess, not really wanting to kind of push that frequency band because of the limited spectrum, right? You only have, 60 megahertz of spectrum. So you have, 3 non-overlapping 20 megahertz channels. So I wouldn't say the technology is dead. Obviously, like you said, there was the noise floor that went through the roof. And again, the same thing happened with 5 gig, right? People say, 5 gig is trash, but it took a new antenna technology like our horns to kind of come out, clean a lot of that up and make it a lot more efficient. So I think the same thing could happen with 2.4. Again, the methodology on most of the deployments with 2.4 is, again, using omnis, right, or extremely sloppy sectors. Maybe we can help in the future. I mean, our array sector does a really good job at suppressing some side lobes, giving you some really good co-location capability because of the integrated backshield and stuff like that. So I think it could have another resurgence, other than the fact that now most of your home routers are going to 5 gig, so all those 2.4 gigahertz home routers that were raising the noise floor in these deployments is now going down. We're seeing again a like you said, a resurgence of it, and I think if we use it correctly this time around, right? For instance, using it for those kind of near line of sight type situations where 2.4 gigahertz attenuates better. It could be a really low cost option for some people compared to, let's say, maybe moving to CBRS, which is a much higher cost expense to kind of jump into the potential there for licensing and other things that's there. So I think there's definitely a place for 2.4. It's probably not going to be for your 100 plus meg packages. It'll be for your real rural, real dense. I think, again, we have to take it, one step forward, where it used to be one Omni, high gain Omni on the top of a tower in a rural area. Let's go back to at least, 2.4 gigahertz with 4 sectors, maybe running 10 megahertz channels to give you non-overlapping, to give you some guard. I mean, there's a lot of tricks and techniques that can be done to really effectively use 2.4 gigahertz in today's market and get to some of these customers that you couldn't get to before at a really effective price point.
Yeah,
So this was done, I think, about 3 years ago. Yeah, there it is, 3 years ago, 2021. You can decide for yourself if 2.4 has made a resurgence.
I call it necessarily a connection of last resort, because it's definitely not that. But again, these are cases where rural connections are spread out, low density, and we're trying to clip through those last few trees. And maybe your 5 gig's not cutting it, especially once it gets rain on the leaves and stuff like that. So This is why we released the 2.4.14 sector earlier this year. We now have the 2.4.17, which will be shipping here soon, which is pretty sweet. Refactored the arrays in there, so we're able to get it in the same form factor, or very, very, very similar form factor, which is pretty sweet. So really happy about the work we were able to get done on that. So that'll be out there soon. We've got a lot of demand.
So that explains why they're talking about 2.4. They released some new 2.4 antennas in 2021. Good for you guys.
That, and we look forward to seeing your guys sort of crazy wackadoo shoot through the stuff we tell you not to shoot through connections, but sometimes you got to get it did. That's the only way to do it.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of things that folks do that sometimes we kind of joke with and stuff like that, and it's we understand at the end of the day you got to do what you got to do, right? Not every WISP has the same operating budget, right? So some people really have to operate on a shoestring budget, and that's understandable. And like I said, I think what we're trying to do is to really just put out there what the real best methods are for these particular frequencies, these types of radios. What works best in these types of situations, especially again non-line of sight. I mean, that's my biggest pet peeve. I understand that there's a lot of wireless technology out there that clearly works in non-line of sight, but it doesn't mean that you should be able to do that, or you should do that in every different frequency band that's out there. So some are better than others, and some could be utilized better than others for that particular job. So in the end, try and apply some of these techniques that we're doing, take into consideration some of the things that we're saying are best known methods. Try not to violate those methods as much as possible, and you should get the best user experience, because in the end, again, that's what we're looking for as an industry. Because if you start doing something that's totally off the wall and really doesn't run well, it really creates this negative perception of WISPs and stuff like that. In the end, we really want that to take off. I mean, if everyone's scared about Skynet and FartLink out there, with their satellite internet offerings and stuff like that, we can see how the negative marketing for that can affect the markets. We don't want that same type of negative thing coming towards the WISP industry. We want to keep it clean. We want to keep those services better. It's okay if you're offering 2 or 5 meg packages, that's cool, but make it a freaking solid 2 or 5 meg connection. Make it something that's absolutely reliable, and again, that'll help us all in the long run.
So that's 3 minutes of my time I wish I could get back, but real quickly, it's important that WISP provide reliable services, high quality, reliable services. Unfortunately, they're not able to do that with RF elements antennas, because RF elements antennas are low quality. They're poor performance. So, and RF elements never properly educated about how to design good, reliable, high quality, point-to-point wireless networks. And they're still not, so they're still not doing it. But their antennas don't support the entire 5 gigahertz band. So right off the bat, you're not getting the appropriate antenna for your radio. If your radio supports the entire 5 gigahertz band and your antenna does not, then that's not a good antenna. That's not a good antenna for that radio. So they have a problem with the frequency range. They have a problem with gain. All of their antennas, their horn antennas, are low gain. They have a problem with VSWR, which relates to the frequency range. So especially if you operate at the low end of the 5 gigahertz band, or at the bottom of the 5 gigahertz band where you're operating outside of the frequency range of the antenna, then you're going to burn out your radio with VSWR. They have the worst in the industry port isolation. So port isolation, you've got your vertical polarity and you've got your horizontal polarity, and these are sending 2 separate data streams. And port isolation measures the interference between the vertical and the horizontal ports. So they inject a signal on one port, and then they measure the amount of signal that bleeds over into the other, and that's the port isolation value. RF Elements has about 12 dB of port isolation, which is the worst in the industry. It's worse than every other antenna brand. And what that means is that under load, you're going to have distorted signal every single time, because your vertical signal is going to bleed into your horizontal signal, and your horizontal signal is going to bleed into your vertical signal. So you've got distorted signal, interference, self-interference baked into the antenna. So at no point is RF Elements going to help WISP do what RF Elements is saying WISP need to do, which is provide robust, reliable, high-quality services to their subscribers. And if you use RF Elements on the tower, then you're providing bad services to everybody within range of the tower. And if you're using RF Elements on the subscriber side, even worse. Let's keep going.
Yeah, 100%. That reliability is such an important aspect of it, because it's so easy to get caught up on prices and speeds and, those sort of peak numbers and stuff. But if it's not reliable, then none of it really matters. So
Exactly.
Also, thank you for placing that FartLink time bomb in my head. So next time when this comes up and I say that, I'm like, I get. So
yeah, I have my my hashtags, right? Like fake G is 5G, FartLink is Starlink, and I'm sure I'll come up with some other ones later.
Yeah, that may have burned getting Elon on the podcast, so it's just the risk we take on this sometimes.
Bring it, man. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So, recent conversation we just had the other day is some of the misunderstandings about how you do the channel planning on some of these big array towers that we set up. So, we're seeing more and more of these folks running 12, 18 sectors, where you run 12 30s, you run 18 20s, or, you do one ring of that, you add another ring, or you throw some ultra horns and stuff on top. And people are like, well, how do you channel plan for that? What's the list? And, it's easy to be like, well, in a totally, greenfield environment with nothing else, just ABC or ABCD. So, but I mean, the real world's real, and it's painful sometimes. And, you've got to look at, you've got to do your spectrum analysis. You've got to look at each one of your sectors and sort of map out, build a chart, I would say, of what that is. So I don't know, what's your common experience when you're talking to folks and talking about some of their initial channel plannings on these bigger arrays?
Yeah, so again, every deployment's different, right? So, some people can get away with AB, some go ABC, ABCD, obviously, it kind of depends. I think, there's two kind of variables that you have to look at, right? So first off is, how well, are the APs co-located? That's the first part of, like, say, GPS sync being successful, right? So the AB, or ABC kind of channel planning really depends on, when you reuse A, does the first A hear you or not, or do you interfere with that? So that might be the case that it doesn't. Maybe everything is great. You're using our horns. You have good spatial diversity between the horns on the tower, so therefore you can use only 2 channels and build a ring of 12. Let's just say that works.
Okay. This is getting out of hand. All right, these guys clearly don't know what they're talking about. So with channel planning, you're planning the sectors. So you're providing service area to a sector, and you use channel A here, and then you use channel B here. And you need to make sure that as you're alternating channels, so you have channel A, channel B, channel A, channel B. That's A-B channel planning, alternating between the first channel and the second channel. But there's your beams are not clean, so you have bleed over into the neighboring sectors, and that's why you have to use a different channel. You have to alternate channels, but that bleed over typically doesn't go through one sector into the next. So typically, you say you've got a 90-degree sector here, you're using channel A. Channel A is going to bleed over into its neighboring sectors, so you use channel B on those neighboring sectors. Then you get a reuse channel A again 180 degrees off. So A, B, A, B. That's A-B channel planning. And you're planning out the coverage. Now, with 30-degree sectors, 30-degree horns, it's the same principle, but you have much smaller sectors now, but you have narrower beam width horns, and they don't bleed over beyond one sector. So they'll bleed into the adjacent sector, but they're not going to bleed over to the two sectors over. So you do A, B, A, B. And the reason why you don't have to worry about co-location interference, the reason why you get frequency reuse, isn't because of the zero side lobes, and it's not because of the positioning in the nulls, and it's not because of this having enough space between your access points. It is because they're all using GPS sync. So you have all your sectors on the same brand using the same TDD ratio. That's the uplink and the downlink ratio. So maybe they're transmitting 75% of the time and they're receiving 25% of the time. And then using GPS, they all synchronize their clocks so that they all transmit at the same time and they all receive at the same time. That's GPS synchronization or transmission synchronization. That prevents, say you've got this access point here on channel A and an access point directly behind it on channel A. They can still hear each other. They can still interfere with each other. But if they both send their transmissions at the same time and they both receive their signals at the same time, then one transmitting antenna isn't going to overwhelm and swamp out the receiving antenna's signal. So being in close proximity, being able to hear each other, you can still reuse the same frequency if you have GPS sync. If you don't have GPS sync, then you absolutely need to start separating your sectors. You need to vertically separate them. You need to position them in nulls. You need to put them on opposite sides of the water tank if you don't have GPS synchronization. With GPS synchronization, you only need to plan the channels in the coverage area so that the stations aren't interfering with each other. So you've got stations here operating on channel A, then you've got stations here operating on channel B, and then you have stations here operating on channel A, and the stations are not interfering with each other, and the coverages are not overlapping with the same channel. So you have non-overlapping coverages and non-overlapping channels using A-B channel planning. The reason why you don't do A, B, C, D, E, F, G channel planning is because that blows out the entire spectrum. So then you end up with towers where you have sectors pointing at each other. So you've got a tower here and a tower here, and the APs are both pointed at each other, blasting at each other, non-synchronized. So you do A-B channel planning to be able to reuse limited spectrum and scale up a larger network even when the towers are pointed at, can see each other, which is typically the case with WISP networks. So that's A-B channel planning. I don't know what these guys are talking about.
The thing that people often forget,
and I don't think they know what they're talking about either,
is that by the time you use A, let's say for the third time, maybe it's on the back of the tower. Yeah, maybe the other APs that are on channel A don't hear that third one. So, in theory, it should work. If that particular frequency is being used, downrange by another tower and it's blasting frequency A right back at that horn or that particular antenna, you can't use it, right? So I think that's the big thing is, you really kind of have to see what your deployment looks like. So it might be AB, it might be ABC or AC or something like that. You might have to throw in that third frequency every now and then, and you can try and reuse A again on the next runaround based on what's available downstream. Now, when we start talking about, building multiple rings, which is very popular, you have to start again, including some spatial diversity, right? You have to have space. Maybe spatial diversity is the wrong word to use, but you have to have space between the rings, basically, to create that isolation. So, I mean, typically,
You don't. So with GPS synchronization, you don't have to have space between the rings on the tower. So if you have an axis point here pointed this way, straight ahead, and an axis point on top of it pointed straight ahead, this one's operating on channel A, this one's operating on channel B, and they're GPS synchronized, then they will both transmit at the same time and they will both receive at the same time, each on their separate channel. Now, you wouldn't have channel A here and channel A directly below it pointed in the same sector. Then you would have interference with the stations, and the access points wouldn't be able to tell the station signals apart. And similarly, you would have transmissions both at the same time. Obviously, you can't have channel A stacked on top of channel A, but you can have channel A stacked on top of channel B, and using GPS synchronization, you don't have to have them vertically separated on the tower. You do have to make sure that you are planning out the station coverages, so you're not going to have channel A here, channel B here, and then channel A here, because now channel A right here is going to interfere with the stations, particularly on the edges of those beams. But the reason why horns are really good for AB channel planning is because of their narrow beam widths. Because if you look at their polar plots, the beams drop off rapidly once you get outside the specified beam width. So that makes for cleaner frequency reuse and easier channel planning. That's what these guys should be talking about right now, not all this nonsense.
you build one ring, and hopefully at least 10 feet below that ring, you can start building your second ring. And
so again, vertical separation doesn't matter if you have GPS sync.
the way we try and do this when we, try and explain it to a WISP that's doing it is you shouldn't have, let's say, A and A, 10 feet apart, but one on top of each other. What the second ring should be pointing down the center of where, the two horns come together, if that makes sense. So you have, channel A here, channel B here, 10 feet down, it should be right in the middle. So you should be shooting down where the two patterns come together. You kind of build like a daisy, right? The way the petals of a daisy go, they don't go all in line. You have a ring, and then it's offset for the next ring, and it's offset for the next.
That's just wrong. So particularly with 30-degree horns, you don't need to fill in the gaps between. In fact, you don't want to do that. So you want to have channel A here, channel B here, and then you would have channel C and channel D. You're going to have to reuse. You're going to have two rings on a tower. You're going to need to use 4 different channels. It's going to have to be A, B, C, D. You're not going to have A here and then A again down here, partially overlapping the coverage area of the other sector. That's wrong.
So it gets pretty complicated. It's very difficult to kind of explain it and not visualize it for people, but I think maybe you start to at least get the idea of how it's done. And again, you never know, what it's going to be like until you actually do it. So
No, you can predict things. So science is real. If you put 2 overlapping sectors on the same channel, you're going to have problems every time.
This textbook, just like you can't just go and trust the spec sheets, right? I mean,
all right, so this is one of my biggest problems with RF elements is that they say that you can't trust data sheets. And they say that because their antenna parameters are bad as per their data sheets. If you understand antenna parameters and you read RF elements data sheets, then you say, these are some terrible antennas. And yet somehow they managed to make it work because of their narrow beam widths. So WISPs figured out how to use RF elements antennas despite the fact that they are low performance antennas. But RF Elements has told WISP not to trust the data sheets because they don't want WISP to know what the data sheets mean and then look at the RF Elements data sheet here and then look at the competitive data sheet there. You're like, wait a second, the competitors make better antennas. So that's why they tell WISP not to trust the data sheets. That's why they fudge their data sheets. That's why they omit important antenna parameters, namely port isolation. There's no port isolation listed on any RF Elements horn data sheet that I've ever seen. And VSWR is omitted as well, generally from their horn antenna data sheets. But yeah, they tell you not to trust it. That's not what a reputable vendor would say.
Things just don't work like that in the real world. I mean, we give you the basic foundation of how these things work and the best known practices for doing it, but it doesn't always work out exactly like that.
No, that's actually a really good point. And I think the point of the misconceptions about, how the horns work, especially in general with blocking out the noise. We hear this quite a bit too. They're like, hey, I put up these horns in this really noisy environment and I'm still seeing a lot of noise. My modulation rates are dropping. I thought I just cut out all the noise. I'm like, yeah. Well, I mean, yes, it cuts out the back lobes, cuts out the side lobes, obviously. That's the point. That's our whole gimmick behind what we're doing with these horns.
Yeah, it is their whole gimmick. It's their biggest lie. So, no, it doesn't cut out the side lobes. No, it doesn't cut out the back lobes. And so they have side lobes, they have back lobes. You put up two co-located horn antennas, you need GPS sync for your co-located access points. That's how you scale up a network. Otherwise, without GPS sync, one will transmit while the other is trying to receive, and the transmission will overwhelm the received signal, even when they're operating on separate channels, even when they're pointed in different directions, even if you have some vertical separation. Absent GPS sync, you definitely need to have proper null positioning on your sectors. And RF Elements doesn't give you the information that you need to do that. They give you hand-drawn antenna patterns that don't match what's actually happening with the antenna. They give you one frequency point, and then they make the claim that there are no side lobes, which is not true. So RF Elements for more than a decade has been telling their WISPs exactly the wrong answers that they need to actually do proper RF planning. But yeah, they're if you have RF Elements horns and you don't have GPS sync, which is all of MikroTik radios, by the way, then you're going to have problems with those two antennas hearing each other and causing self-interference.
Right, but the noise, your unwanted signal that's not your carriers that you're trying to deal with, that are in the main lobe, in that main service face of that antenna, there's no magic bullet or panacea to get rid of that. And I think that's
so there is a magic bullet and panacea to get rid of the noise in the main lobe, and that is with narrow beam widths, which goes back to the front of this podcast where they say more gain does not equal more better. More gain means more focus. If you focus the signal in a specific direction where you need it, then that will be the magic bullet that you need to deal with noise. That's how you reduce noise, is by reducing the beam width of the main lobe.
Big misconception, and people are like, I don't have a channel planner, I just throw these up and they magically cut out of the noise. And unfortunately, that's not how physics works in the real world.
Yeah, and we saw that, just recently, right, Caleb? We were working with a customer, and it's a really high noise environment, and, we said, well, let's look at the spectrum scan, right? So you saw, all this noise, and you saw this opening down here, and you saw all this noise over here, and for whatever reason, they wanted to operate where, there was this high intensity, right? And it's like, well, it's noisy, but the horn should work. It's like, yeah, but the horn is telling you that it sees all these frequencies being used down its bore sites. It can't tune that out, right? but you have this whole chunk right here that's available. Why aren't you using that? Well, because we want to see it work in noise. It's like there's a difference between the ambient noise and the noise floor that comes up and actually, physically use channels that are pointing right at your antenna. So, that again, the noise isolation and the beauty of the horns is that when you put one out, you will find somewhere in the spectrum a usable channel, and that's the one you should be using, not to try and live within a bunch of used channels that are pointing right at you.
Yeah.
Well, that's true for every antenna. So if you can find a channel that's available, then that's going to work. That's not the beauty of horn antennas. That's just how you need to do things. But the beauty of horn antennas is actually the narrow beam width, so that you're seeing less noise and interference. If you've got an interfering signal right here, then if you have a horn antenna that only has a main beam right here, then of course you're going to avoid that interfering signal. And so by using narrower beam widths, you have more options to avoid potential interference. That's the beauty of horn antennas. These guys don't know that. They still don't know this. 2025, they still don't know this.
These spectrum analyses are really important, and this is why we always try to stress, if you're new to the ecosystem and you're like, well, I want to try this up, like, we want to, hey, try these horns where you've already got an existing sector, right? Do your spectrum analysis, take pictures, take notes, and everything else. Swap that antenna over to the horn, now compare it. And what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot less reds, you're going to see a lot more greens, you're going to see your waterfall densities decrease, you're going to see gap.
So that's not true. If you have a 90-degree sector and you swap it for a 90-degree horn, you're not going to see significantly less reds. You're not going to see significantly more greens. If you have a 90-degree sector and you swap it for 3 30-degree horns, then you will see significantly less reds and significantly more greens. But beam width for beam width, like antenna for like antenna, you're not going to get improved noise performance necessarily from a horn, particularly if you've got these interfering signals within the desired service area, the coverage area of the antenna.
Like a lot of times, those hard sort of barriers where your channels will start show up more blockier. Instead of just being one big blob, you'll start to see more of the focus on the channelized stuff, and you can get in there in those nulls and operate. So, that before and after is the experience part of it. Like, you've got to play around with a few, the same as planning the frequency arrays or the frequency channels on these big arrays. Like, until you get out there and do one of them and kind of see what it works out in the real world, it's all just a paper exercise. But these things come with experience, and it's just a matter of playing around with a little bit, and you'll get it figured out. So don't fret.
Well, so WISPs figured out how to use horn antennas to deal with noise. These guys never figured it out.
Don't go into it. Don't go boldly into the night with your eyes closed.
Like these guys.
Oh, let's see. What else has come up interesting? Oh, the connectors on top. Mm-hmm. So, you actually explained this to me the other day, and I never actually thought about it this way. So, it comes up, well, on the twist port adapter with the SMA connectors, people are like, well, why is this connector on top? I want to go to the side and the bottom. Well, that's not how that twist port is built. That twist port is built so that one connector on top and then one connector to the right, and that unit actually has a weep hole in the bottom. So, tiny little hole, so if you ever did pick up some moisture or, condensation, from rapid temp changes and stuff like that, it's got somewhere to go. So it's really important that you put that up, the labels up the right way. But we got into a conversation about how the connectors are more waterproof if they're on top with the way that.
So on that, RF Elements has this, it's called the TPA SMA, the twist port adapter for SMA connectors. And it's possible to install this thing upside down. And if you do that, then it takes on water. That's bad design. So they should have never allowed that antenna to be installed upside down so that it takes on water. But they have this common problem where users install it upside down. How do I know? My first time installing one of these things, I installed it upside down as well. So I assumed that the cable should be coming down, not going up. And so the when it's installed upside down, then the weep hole and the button are on top, and then water just streams through this thing and causes VSWR issues because RF Elements doesn't seal their antennas. So this is a design problem. It's not a user problem. It's a design problem because it shouldn't be possible to snap this in place upside down. But it is, and many users do it, including this guy.
So if you'll explain to the crowd kind of what you told me.
And I did it when I was testing RF Elements antennas versus my antennas. So I also made this mistake where I had the cable coming down, expecting that to be the way that this should be installed, only to find out that, yeah, there's a logo here, and the logo should be up. And that's, you could say that it was user error. I think that's design problem, and I know it's a design problem because other users, not just myself, commonly have this issue.
You did a really good job of it.
Yeah, so it'd be kind of hard to visualize this. So if you look at, this being the SMA with the thread, right? This is what's basically on the radio or the twist port adapter. If you think about the, RP SMA is usually a barrel that kind of goes around the actual thread itself. When it's facing up, it actually works better because when you seal with either cold shrink or mastic, whatever it is, water will run down the outside of the nut, and then it comes and it touches the threads and it drips down, right? Water actually gets into the connector via the thread. So when your connector is facing down, again, the threads are here and this is the nut and the barrel's here, well, water is going to get on the threads and then it'll start dripping down inside the threads into the connector, and that's how you get your water and connector. So actually having it facing up is better than having it facing down.
And really, honestly, this one.
That may or may not be true. Water will, if it's not watertight, then water will creep up the threads as well. So water can get everywhere in a connector that's not watertight. And RF Elements, this TPA SMA, will definitely take on water if the user accidentally installs it wrong. And the even bigger problem is that rather than should the cable be pointed up or pointed down, water can creep up threading, and often does.
Make sure we got those visuals of you showing that on the video to
like that. And
yeah,
you turn it on.
You turn it on. So, but no, that's a really important point, and I think we see this all the time. And I'm like, guys, if the connectors on top was a bad idea, all the radio manufacturers wouldn't be doing it. So,
yeah.
Whether you're Prisms or 3Ks or 3KLs or whatever, so. I mean, Air Fiber 11's got end connectors on top and stuff.
Yeah, for a lot of this stuff, it's really out of convenience, right? So they're not, it's not always the best design. Doesn't mean it's the absolute worst, right? But I think there's some compromises that manufacturers make based on that. And CBRS sectors are probably one of the best cases of this, right? So, you see a lot of CBRS sectors with the end connectors at the bottom of the actual patch array sector. And that's because it just makes sense. At the bottom, you screw it straight up, you can have your drip loop and it kind of goes up to the radio, whereas if you have it, coming out the back, then it's going to be sideways and you have to have a weird bend and what have you. But really, when you look at antenna design, specifically patch array design, the connectors being in the middle of the array or closer to the middle of the array is actually more efficient and gives you a better output from your antenna than having the feed lines at the bottom, because then you have to have these large traces because the patch array feeds into the center of the array, right? So you have a lot of parasitic radiation or parasitic loss through these traces that create a lot of these side lobes and this near field type, antenna. Basically, it's like a long antenna that you're creating. So it's really not the best place to put it for that particular reason. But again, manufacturers do it because it's convenient, because maybe, the user base says, well, it'd be a lot easier if it was at the bottom. So like, hey, let's just put it there. rather than say, yeah, we can put it there, but we're not giving you the best antenna. So you can see this in our, CBRS sector that we have. We have the connectors in the middle of the array where it's supposed to be to give you the best RF performance. And we've done some really cool stuff to help you with weatherproofing and stuff like that on it as well. So we make the best out of both worlds.
Yeah, that's a really slick setup. So all that stuff's online on the website now. So check it out. The little hat protector covers are pretty slick. So, but yeah, just in general, like as much people want to sweat connectors aside, top, bottom, whatever else. In the end, if you do a good job of weatherproofing them, then you're going to be fine. 99.999% of the time, right? So whether you're old school and run tape, mastic tape, whether you're using cold shrink or some of this newer tech and stuff out there, in the grand scheme of things, as long as you do a good quality job of sealing up your connectors, you typically don't have nothing to worry about anyways.
Yep, so absolutely.
And then
So I'd just like to point out, with IsoHorns, we have the RPSMA connectors, and we have the plastic housing, and we have the radio mount plate. So you can mount the radio close to the connectors. We provide you with the connectors so that you have everything you need to connect your radio to your antenna. We use the radio mount plate to keep those jumper cables short so that you have minimal loss, cable loss from the cables. And then we use the plastic housing to keep everything essentially waterproof. So with IsoHorns, you get all of that. You don't need to do the mastic. You don't need to worry about where to mount the radio relative to the antenna. But when we made these choices, RF Elements and their fans mocked us for the choices that we made regarding that. So we have a universal mount plate, so you don't need a proprietary twist port adapter. And we provide you with the cables. So if you use the TPA SMA adapter from RF Elements, then you need to waterproof the cables. There is no mount plate. You have to buy your jumper cable separately. So already, like, our design is far superior to RF Elements in every way. Not proprietary, everything you need, good RF performance, good weatherproofing, all inclusive. But RF Elements and their fans mocked us for creating universal connectivity, all-inclusive design. They tried to portray their proprietary ecosystem of adapters as somehow being better when it's better in no ways. In no ways is their proprietary ecosystem of adapters better. Ours is better in every way. But they don't even understand any of that. They actually believe that the reason why their twist port adapters are supposed to be good is because they have no cable loss, when in fact all they do is hide the cables under the plastic housing. So anyway, that's my spiel on connectors in regards to RF Elements.
Up here, we've talked about fiber several times in this. I don't think we necessarily want to beat the drum again on a lot of that. But one of the things that was brought up is, hey, people are like, fiber's the best. If fiber's the only option, fiber's the best option. And we've discussed in the past, no, it is, it depends on a lot of things. So I mainly just want to sort of reiterate that the choice of fiber, whether you're deploying the business case as you as an operator or the demographics of where you're deploying, is an extremely subjective thing, right? So like so many other things in our industry or in the world in general, everyone wants a black and white, objective, this is this, right? But it's a gray world, and a lot of these things are super subjective. And whether or not you're doing fiber and how you're doing it really plays into that so much.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I think the hybrid model is here to stay, and I think all WISP should be considering, is offering some sort of fiber connectivity when they can, if they can, obviously. I really think the whole fiber push has a lot to do with this kind of just, general industry push for more and more bandwidth per customer. And a lot of it is just wasteful, right? There's a lot of government money out there. And therefore, fiber has, some of the highest guaranteed kind of speeds and latency and is able to, again, on paper, deliver what the minimum requirement is to be categorized as as broadband, right? But I think WISPs are able to do it with wireless faster, right? I mean, obviously we have 60 gigahertz now. We're pushing multiple hundreds of megs, which I still think is a lot for your average customer. Of course, there's the very niche market of gamers that have to download a 4 or 5 gig patch or update for their game and stuff like that. But I mean, the typical WISP customer, and I'm not a WISP, again, I always have to say that, right? So maybe there's some WISPs out there that can share some of that data with us, and I'd be interested to see what the breakdown is of the type of services that are really hogging this bandwidth and really require it, and what percentage is that of your overall WISP customer base. And just shooting in the dark, I'm thinking 10%, right? Probably not more than that. Streaming some Netflix, streaming some YouTube videos on a downlink, we're talking dozens of megs. Probably for the average household, again, there's always going to be the ones that, are on the torrents and downloading constantly and doing some weird shit, but that's not your typical user. It's not your typical user at all. So fiber is great. Right? Definitely get on board if you can. There's a place for it. But again, I think it's what's fueling the drive for fiber right now is this just overwhelming mismarketing of what users need as far as real deliverable bandwidth in order for the average household to operate in the modern world.
Yeah, for sure. And we were talking with some new folks and stuff at WISPapalooza a couple weeks ago, and they're like, man, should I even try doing this? Because fiber this, fiber that. And I'm like, talking about, well, where are you located? Where are your demographics? What does your density look like? And the realistic side of it is fiber's never going to make sense here. Now, there's a lot of government money pushing a lot of it out there, but those are only sort of slim areas, and it's based on how good your congressman may be at getting that hand out there and getting all that free government money at play. So, yeah. I mean, I think the potential for new WISP deployments is probably as high, if not higher, than has ever been. So don't lose hope. Yeah, fiber is awesome if you can do it, or do it where it makes sense and keep your wireless where it makes sense. Again, it's such a subjective thing, and I think anyone that dictates there's only one answer here is misguiding at the least and just sort of downright dubious at the worst. So,
yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I think we about hit our time this week. That was the top list of topics I just sort of grabbed from questions, but we're here to answer your questions. So, folks, you want to hear from us? You want us to talk about some different topics?
All right. Well, that's going to do it for me as well. Have I been fair? Have I been fair to RF Elements in my critique of what they're saying? Please comment. Let me know. Thanks.